Hi, my name is Lisa Shea, and I'm here with talented, beautiful, wonderful, friendly, intelligent author and poetess, Trisha. So, Trisha, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So tell us what you're working on.
Okay, well, currently, my project that I'm focused on right now is finishing up edits for the Wicked Women anthology for the New England Horror Writers. We put out a call last year looking for all women and women identifying writers in the New England area who are members of New England Horror Writers. We had an amazing amount of contributions and submissions, and I'm really thrilled about what we finally picked for our table of contents. We've got 3 poems and 19 short stories in this edition. And this year we have 2 special guests. Jane Yolen sent us a poem. I'm like, and then also bestselling author Hilary Monahan sent us a short story that I'm really excited about as well. But besides those, we have a couple of new authors who've never published before. One of them did this wonderful little Gothic lighthouse tale, which is beautiful. One of the stories literally gave me a nightmare after I read it, and I'm like, I clearly need to buy this story. It was about this creepy woman in a coffee shop who could deem fates with crumbs in an odd way. It was so haunting. We also have some dark fairy tale that someone sent me, and that is just really, there's so much about this that I'm excited to share with the world.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, so we're going through edits now. We're working with a cover artist as well with some of the images based on the short stories, and it's set to come out in October of this year. So that's what my focus is on at the moment. I also have coming out this year, I am in Don't Turn Out the Lights, which is an anthology from HarperCollins dedicated to the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series. And that one I was really, really proud to get into. I've got a short piece called The Scully Horse on that, based on my experience in horse rescue. And it's set for 8 to 12-year-olds, so it's spooky and creepy, but not, horribly terrifying. And it's under my Trisha Wooldridge name, which is where I publish all the Safer for Children works. I also have been working on a Patreon that is based on ekphrastic poetry. I put it on hold because I actually just recently had surgery, so I'm like, let's calm down a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
But I've been having a lot of fun, and actually part of that was inspired by you and working with the Blackstone Valley Artists Association with the art poetry pairing.
Yeah.
So I started taking more of my own photos and writing poems to go with it. And especially like these past few months, since obviously March, with the world in so many terrifying directions, it's hard to focus on longer pieces. So I can get a lot of work out either through my poetry, through photographs that I take in my backyard, because I have a very, very wild backyard. My husband and I did a lot of hiking in places where like not many other people went, so it was safe social distancing. And when my barn where I had my horse reopened, we had a really good social distancing schedule for that, so I could have some quiet time to meditate, take photos, and be inspired at the barn as well.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so that's basically what I've been working on this year. So
when you were doing the processing's the wrong word. When people were sending you in poetries and short stories and things for your compilation, what did you find the winnowing, we'll call it winnowing, the winnowing process like to help you decide between what you would accept and what was near to acceptance but not quite ready yet?
Yes, I wrote a post about this too, about halfway through. There were people who were sending in submissions that were not stories, like short story submissions that didn't have a beginning, middle, and an end. They were kind of almost a vignette, but there was no purpose to them. That was ones that I'm like, okay, not really ready. I was surprised at how many people hadn't done a really good copy edit of their own work when they submitted it. Because here's the thing. So I'm doing these edits now, and while I want the best stories, I also don't have a lot of time to go through and fix grammar stuff that most authors should be able to handle on their own.
Right.
So there was a lot of those. Some of them I would send back especially if they sent it early. I sent back several revise and rewrites, and we took about half of the revise and rewrites that got sent back to us because they did an amazing job. But if they didn't follow basic writing parameters, if they didn't follow, and then again, that still shocks me, like how many authors aren't following guidelines. Like, if you're not following the guidelines, are you going to listen to my edits if I give you edits?
Right.
I also, for this one, because I really wanted to nurture and help and get more women to submit, I also gave feedback on all of the rejections, which
oh wow,
is a lot of work.
Oh yeah.
But I tried to explain this is why I didn't take this particular story. So yeah, some of the big things that I see authors make mistakes in is too many points of view and jumping around with points of view, not having a consistent point of view. So it gets confusing to the reader. So in the author's head, it's really clear what you want to say. For the reader who's not in your head, when you're jumping from one character's brain to another character's brain, it gets confusing. You lose track of who's thinking what and who's in the scene. Timing and the use of correct verb tense is another big one that, because it's difficult for me to edit, something that's going to take me a longer time to edit, if there's mistakes in this, I'm less likely to take it, because making sure that you know the time frame of when the actions are happening in a scene. And this is, again, when the author's in their head, it's absolutely clear to the author. But if it's not in proper verb tense on the page. So, for example, if you've got a past tense story, right, which is one of the most common tenses that you have, if you're describing events that have completed before the narrative events of that story, they need to all be in past perfect. And if they're not, they blend into what's going on in the story. And the reader can't follow, okay, so when did this happen? Did this happen? Is this happening now, or did this happen before? And because I can't read the author's mind, I'm like, so when did this happen? So they're more complicated edits to put through. Other times, and I still see this, and it's, to me, I thought it would be less of a thing that authors would do, but just switching between past and present tense in the same narrative, that's the thing that really needs to not happen, because, again, it's confusing to the reader, and it throws you out of the story. So, and then there were a few stories that, like, I've read this story before, like, I could predict the ending right away. There was nothing unexpected. It was a very common horror movie trope. That I've seen it done this particular way before. So those are the ones that I didn't pick either.
Well, and I think that's a reason that people should read as much as they can in a given topic area, or even in a given subtopic area, because if you're new to it, you might write a story and say, oh, this is the coolest thing ever. Everyone's going to love this, and not realize that there's already been like 12 super popular stories that told that exact same story. And people are going to read it and say, oh, all right, this is a ripoff of X and Y and Z. And even if you didn't mean to do that, that's how the readers are going to get the impression of it.
And a good way for authors, especially newer authors, to check that out is to actually, like, use terms of their story and put them into something like TV tropes. So, like, if you've got like a collection, a horror movie story based on, like, someone who collects dead bodies, bodies or collects these things, type in to like TV tropes, collector of dead bodies, and you'll see, oh, there's been 12 different things like that.
Right.
So those useful tricks for newer writers to use is to actually use something like TV tropes for what their themes are. And if they still want to play with that theme, looking and seeing what there's been done, and then deciding to take it a new twist can be very well done.
Right. Right, because then people are expecting to go in a certain way and thinking that it's a cliche, and then all of a sudden something happens.
Yes, and actually we had 2 stories that I expected to end completely differently, and they were absolute surprises, and I'm like, oh, I'm so delighted at this. So yeah, so when you do it well, that will catch an editor's attention, and you'll be more likely to be like, oh no, I need this story.
Do you find it happens sometimes that you just happen to get a couple of stories all on the exact same topic, and so that makes you less likely to take one of them that might have been really good because you're looking for a breadth of topic areas?
Yes, actually, that is a thing to keep in mind too, because if I have too many similar themes, even if I like the theme one, I'm going to pick the one that has the least amount of errors. Or if they sent it in earlier in the submission process, we were trying to get some acceptances and rejections out early. If I accepted a story that had a theme, even if a story that I did end up liking better came in, I can't take it because I've already sent out an acceptance for this other story. And in most cases, I think in this time, I did not have that happen, but in other anthologies I have. But I mean, like I said, all the stories that I picked, I'm so glad they submitted. But there were some, when it came down to winnowing it down for what page, because you need to count word count, page count, because you need to have a reasonably sized anthology.
Right.
There was a lot that was really, Scott, who is my co-editor, and I, Scott Goudsword, one of the founders of the New England Horror Writers, went back and forth on a lot of topics, like, okay, so this was a nitty. Why do you like this one, and what are the issues you see with this one? Why do you like this one, and what are the issues you see with this one? And then ultimately, for most of those, it came down to how much work is it going to take to get this to the level we want of all the stories. So sometimes some of the more novel ideas got pushed aside because someone sent me a cleaner manuscript. Which is why I can't emphasize enough for authors to really, really, really learn how to self-edit, talk to your beta readers, chat with your writers groups, and send in the absolute cleanest copy you absolutely can.
Well, and with so many tools that are out there, I mean, you don't even have to pay money for many of the tools. They just have them on the web. And especially since you're talking an anthology, you're not talking a full-length novel. So it should be something that you could paste into a website tool and have it come back and say, look, you've got 18 spelling errors. Should probably fix them.
Yeah. But that doesn't catch as verb tense issues.
Oh, right. No, sure.
Chatting with an author on that, and they had done that, exactly that. And they're like, but I ran it through this, and this, and they had serious verb tense issues. They didn't get caught. So, like, again, this is where having a network of friends or other, groups of people to look it over and have that human interaction. So, also check your software, because depending on how you send things, they're going to get messed up with formatting, and sometimes it'll send an earlier draft, like it'll strip the last set of edits. I had that happen to one author as well. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, is know what you're using for software, and make sure it's compatible. Don't send directly from Google Documents. Use some sort of word processor, because Google Documents does mess up a lot of stuff. And also be aware, if you're using Apple products, most editors don't use Apple. They use some sort of, other computer. And Apple doesn't play nice. So if you don't send it in the right format, the editor's gonna get this messy chunk of text that may have all your N's turned into tildes.
Right, right.
So practice sending with friends, with other computers, to see how your document gets sent.
Mm-hmm. So on the compilation you're making, do you call it horror? Do you call it spooky? How do you sort of put into a category?
For this particular anthology, it's from the New England Horror Writers.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to have an aspect of horror.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them dipped more into dark fantasy, dark science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But so long as fear or the exploration of fear
Mm-hmm.
was part of the theme of the story, that's how I categorize it as horror.
Okay.
So we have this wonderful, I mentioned the dark fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much the narrative voice is that of a fairy tale, but the story is of this child's growth and the potential for them to become evil based on what they're afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it horror to me because it is part of that exploration of fear and how that affects you.
Mm-hmm.
Another, the science fiction one that absolutely, we didn't get anything at all like this, and I loved it. It's Museum with Dead Birds. Is very much a science fiction. Robots and technology have, come alive and are using humans as toys. There's these, and they pull out the souls, and the souls go around hunting humans. So there's a lot of fear because, first of all, you're exploring what it is to be dead and have a soul.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a story of a child who is running away and finds herself in this fully automated museum of birds.
Mm.
And seeing how she now views the world, having gone through that level of trauma,
mm-hmm.
is very much to me what horror is, because that fear, that constant fear for her life, fear for her soul, has changed her. And when you've got this closed system computer that she interacts with, assuming she'd be like children from before,
mm-hmm.
and you see that difference, it's like, oh, mm-hmm. And it makes you think about what children who go through trauma, even, without a robot revolution,
right,
would go through.
Mm-hmm.
So also, dead birds can be really creepy.
Is there a particular kind of horror you're enjoying right now?
Let's see. I'm liking, like I said, I love everything that's in the anthology, and it's a pretty widespread, from like contemporary to humans are just have evil sides to them, and there's no magic, no supernatural. It's just the utter evilness of humanity being explored, mm-hmm. versus I also love the supernatural sense. I also love mixing in the magical and the real world, the mundane world, mm-hmm. and those little corners there. For fun, I've actually been reading some extreme horror erotic poetry, which has been fascinating. Mm-hmm. Looking at like the beauty of that. I also recently submitted to a more bizarro extreme horror press for one of my novellas. So I wanted to do some reading in that to get an idea of what that is.
Yeah.
And that is a really fascinating realm of horror, because it plays with your assumed rationale, mm-hmm. what you assume, how you assume the world works. There's this, you can go in almost a whimsical direction with it, mm-hmm. or just a complete break from the laws of reality. Mm-hmm. And the well done ones in extreme horror still have a purpose for that extremeness. It's not just there for shock value. Mm-hmm. The overall message and the exploration of the levels of fear are part of delving that deeply into the extreme. Mm-hmm. So.
But I have a feeling that the more one reads things that are edgy, the more that mildly edgy things no longer seem edgy. And you need to make it a little edgier to get that same kind of reaction out of it. Because now you've seen gently edgy so many times that it feels like normal almost.
I don't think so, because if it's well done in either case, it's the amount of how edgy it is serve the story. So if it's not a particularly edgy, if it's a slow burn, quiet horror and it's well done, I'm going to enjoy it just as much for its lack of extreme, for having the stuff happen off stage. If you've done a good job capturing that quiet horror, because that exists too. I mean, especially like now we've got this sense of existential anxiety over everything.
Yeah.
And a really good exploration of that can be cathartic because it is so relatable. So I think there's a place for all of it. I also think that the people who are drawn to the different types of those are drawn because they've also had some life experiences where they've seen the extreme amount, sadly, of evil and terribleness in humanity and in the world. So, but also a lot of the people who I do know who read and write extreme horror still appreciate your quiet, everyday horror as well. Again, just because it's a different aspect of dealing with what we're afraid of.
Okay. I guess we've talked before at the panels how I personally get challenged by torture scenes and that sort of stuff, and it seems like a lot of TV shows are creeping further and further, so that shows I used to think were safe that I could watch, like NCIS, which is pretty lighthearted, now suddenly NCIS is having torture scenes and stuff in there, and I'm starting to say, do we really need this? It was one thing to have it in Game of Thrones when I knew it was coming and I could just like not watch the scene, but there's other things that used to be tame, we'll say, that are seeming less tame to me.
Yeah. Sorry. But yeah, I thought I'd turn the sound off on this. But no, that is a fair point. And I think it's not necessarily the audiences that are driving that so much. A lot of people are falling out of watching those shows and viewership's kind of going down. And I think a lot of the broadcast programming doesn't know what to do. So they think, all right, if we make this, if we put a shock value to this, people will watch it because it's something new. But once you get to a certain point, if it's not serving the story, people are not as interested. If you're actually using it in a way that serves the story, whether it's a series or something like that, then it can be well done. And using NCIS versus something like, say, Hannibal. For NCIS, there's no need to have the torture scenes because that's not what the stories are about on that. Hannibal specifically is an exploration of that. So it works. And it fed into what people needed for that thing, for that specific. The audience who's watching Hannibal is not the same audience who's watching NCIS.
Right.
Or even if they are, they're not going into it expecting the same thing. And I don't think that the salespeople for television shows realize that. In general, with marketing and sales, I don't think that gets realized at the nuance of it. I don't think is getting realized, especially in the popular culture level. And I think that's why we're seeing more and more streaming services doing better than the broadcast networks.
We've been watching lots of Amazon Prime and other things because you can really hone in on the type of story that you want to watch.
I mean, have you watched The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel?
Yep.
Oh my goodness, I love that. And I'm just telling you how much I just love extreme horror. But I love The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It's fresh, it's adorable, it's not, I mean, there's a couple of raunchy jokes, but they're not even that bad. But that's what I wanted out of that series.
Mm-hmm.
So I can go pick that series and enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can find another series that I want to watch that has that and follow that. And because this buffet is out there and people are able to find these things that didn't exist before,
Mm-hmm.
I think the numbers are confusing the salespeople too, because, oh, this did so well. But you know what I mean?
Yep. Yep. Right. So I should probably go back to books. So what are some of your favorite horror authors?
That's, oh goodness. Let's see. I love Hilary Monahan. That's why I invited her to the thing. If you haven't read her, she's an amazing. She has a lot of YA as well as adult horror. Very snarky voice. If you love that kick-ass kind of like take no shit voice. And also she has a great story craft to what she does. And because of her own experience, she has a lot of mystic and almost magical realism to her horror, which I also love. Let's see. So the poetry that I'm reading is from Rath James, and that was if you died tomorrow, I would eat your corpse. And that's again really, it's beautiful and gruesome. And seeing authors who can marry that very well, to me, is just an amazing talent. Because when you have something that ought to turn your stomach but is also beautiful, that's just a great contradiction. And I love that. I mean, I was reading Stephen King, obviously, at like 8, 9, 10, 11. I actually like his shorter stuff better.
Okay.
For reading wise. As a complete, though I did like The Gunslinger and oh my goodness, brain. The current book that our world is based on, that was made to a miniseries twice over. Oh my goodness. Moon. Moon. Why can't I think of that? I'll come back to that.
Okay.
It was an end of the world based on a pandemic. That was huge. I also have read, trying to go through because I've also been doing a lot of work. So like this stuff is Cat Scully's Jennifer Strange. I edited that in January.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. It just came out last week. It's a YA for fans of Evil Dead. So you've got snarky teenagers fighting ghosts and demons. It's awesome. That one I adored. I read it over multiple times editing, and I can't recommend that one enough. Let's see. So that's Cat Scully. Linda Addison is another poet I love because she's just a beautiful poet. So I've been rereading some of her collections lately. Stephanie Wytovich is also a great poet that is that fits more into the horror genre. And hers are a lovely mix of Romani modern witchcraft and just the crappiness of living in today's world. So hers are, and they're very, very musical. Actually, hers and Linda Addison. If you like just poetry that you can feel on your tongue, those are amazing poets to look into. Any other short stories? Because again, I've also had a much lower focus lately. So shorter poetry, shorter stories have all been kind of what's been on my mind more likely.
Yeah.
But those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay, great. So why don't you tell us about some of your own work?
see. I've been doing more poetry lately because working on my longer work's just been much harder.
Yeah.
But like I said, what I have out coming out in October is Scully Horse, which is part of the Don't Turn Out the Lights.
Mm-hmm.
And that one I really excited. It was based on my horse rescue times. It's a ghost story. It's an equine ghost story,
Mm-hmm.
and it's short, so I can't really say more without giving away anything.
Yep. Okay.
So I've enjoyed that. I'm in the Twisted Book of Shadows, which just won a Shirley Jackson Award.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
And that has my short story, At Least the Chickens Are All Right.
Okay.
Which is based on the barn where I keep my horse. And I loved writing this story. So this one is a very odd, almost zombie-esque thing with pandemic elements, because even though I wrote it way before that, told through a 12-year-old who volunteers at the barn, because we have a lot of those who are doing that. And honestly, what I love to say about that is the only thing that I can promise you is the title. At least the chickens are all right. And I had a lot of fun writing that one. And that's available through Twisted Publishing in Haverhill House.
Okay.
It's called Twisted Book of Shadows. It was also nominated for a Stoker, though we didn't win that one. I was really shocked that we did win the Shirley Jackson. Well, I shouldn't be shocked, because there's some amazing stories in that. Speaking of short fiction, those are all great stories. Also, Cindy O'Quinn's story in that one, one of the first ones, Lucille, oh goodness, that one's just wonderfully creepy. There's a lot of just amazing stories in that one too, for people who like short fiction.
Okay.
What else? Then also what came out last year was Wicked Weird, which was weird horror, which is also a play with what your assumptions about reality are. Weird horror goes anywhere from almost like Lovecraftian to almost not quite bizarro magical realism. You don't exactly know what is real, what's going on in the narrator's head. You get to play with a lot of unreliable narrators with that. And that one, I actually is one of the stories that I'm the most proud of. It was one of the hardest for me to write. And that one is Mass of the Greatest Sin. And that is an exploration of horror visited upon fat women in our culture. And the abuse that people don't realize that women go through with that. But yeah, that one, every time I've got to read that one out loud, I've had people come up afterwards in tears.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So that's what's currently out of mine.
Well, and you have past pieces too that people can look for.
Oh yeah, well the 3 novels are still out of print, and I haven't had a chance to do anything with those yet. Anything in the New England Horror Writers Anthology. So I'm editing this one, but I had been accepted into all the prior ones. In most of those, I have story poems, which I'm really proud of. So if you like poetry and you like stories along the lines of like Beowulf and Lady of Shalott, that's what I write for those. And some are free verse, some are rhymed and metered. They all definitely are horror. Wicked Weird was the first time I didn't do a poem, but it is a lyrical short story. So there's a lot of poetic wording in that. Yeah. So those are the ones that are most recent that have come out. I've been doing a lot of editing. I've also had a lot more health issues in the past couple years. So my output has just not been what it normally is. So I've been doing less submissions and sadly less just producing of writing.
Well, your health always comes first.
Yes. Yeah, I do that, and then I edit for a lot of people. and, getting those done for the deadlines. Also, I try and make sure that I don't let anyone else down either.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like for many of your stories that you're writing out of personal concerns or issues that are swirling in your head, and it's a way of releasing them, like you were saying, I think a catharsis.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It goes back to like that almost writer prime directive of write what you know, even if you're writing something totally supernatural, the emotions should be things that you know. And that's what makes a compelling story, is if something has moved you so strongly, and you can get that onto paper. It's not only good for you, it's good for other people who, and it says especially with horror, a lot of people who come into horror have gone through terrible situations. So if you can help them heal by sharing your healing on the paper, and even if your healing is not a happy ending, if it's dealing with like this pain, sometimes seeing that and seeing, okay, someone else has felt this pain matters a lot to people. And it's also one of the things to explore, and in general, especially with my themes in horror, is when you're bullied, when you're abused, when people treat you like a monster, you have this sense of, well, am I a monster? Should I just be the monster? Would it just be easier for me to be the monster that they assume instead of fighting it? Am I more empowered if I take the monster route? And those are things that I think we all need to explore, because at some point everyone gets into this point where you've lost power. You are disempowered, and you're in a place of people assuming you're a monster, assuming you're a freak, assuming awful things, and like, should I just go along with this? Is it because you get tired of fighting, you get tired of the abuse, of the pain, and at some point, is it giving up, or is it finding your power? And those are things, and I think most people who want to be good, the question is if I empower myself, if I do this, am I going to hurt someone else? Or if I hurt someone else to save someone else? And those are things that we think of. And playing with those fears are primal to us. If we've been hurt and someone we love is going through that, what would you do to stop that pain from happening to someone else? Would you go to a monstrous effect to keep someone else from being hurt? And that's what I think really good horror explores.
Well, and I imagine part of it is if someone is being a bully and you know that they're bullying not only you but probably other people, then maybe rising up and stopping them, even if it may seem like I would say a bad action, it can easily be justified as a good action because you're stopping someone who's already doing bad things in the first place.
Except, and this is actually one of the stories that I almost took but didn't, you find out that that person's a bully because they're being abused and that's the only way they know.
Yep.
And so if you were to fight them, you're just continuing their abuse. So can you reach out and talk to them? Do you have the strength? I mean, not everyone has the strength or the ability to reach out. Can you make a more compassionate choice? And if you try and make the more compassionate choice, are you putting your own safety on the line to try and reach out to someone who is also hurting? So that's part of it. Like, just assuming that the bully is a bully because they're a bad person leaves off the fact that they could be in so much pain that this is all they know, and that's their cry for help.
Right.
And that's also part of what the horror is if you did, and so say you rose up against someone who's a bully, abusive, you saved someone else, but then you realize you've just destroyed another life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing that's part of fear. Is there a way for me to try and save both?
Mm-hmm.
Or if not, is it worth, what are the options, and what happens when your options are limited?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, and I think, like you were saying, when you were telling stories and then people were being emotionally affected by it, I think that's one of the powerful things about writing is that you may be able to express something that someone else is having a lot of trouble expressing, and then when they hear your take on it, suddenly the pieces click in their mind and they're able to make some forward progress on it.
Yes. Yes, or even just being seen. So in the opening of Mass of the Greatest Sin, it opens with a fat character trying to take the tea somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and then just sitting in the seats that are not designed for fat bodies, like
Yep.
describing that pain that people don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and then describing how other people on the tea assume that it's perfectly fine to harass you
Mm-hmm.
because you're fat.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly when it comes to being fat, there is this entitlement that people have that they're better than you, and they can shame you. They can, tell you they obviously know more than you're a doctor. It's not,
Yep.
you
Yep.
just stopped eating. Really, really. I never thought to try that.
Right.
Or especially in situations where you've got sexual predators who, like, oh, you're fat, you should be honored that I am groping your leg, because, and things like that, and no one really talks about that either.
Mm-hmm.
So even just like feeling seen, going to a doctor's office and have the doctor look at the screen and look at the numbers and not look at you. So I
Mm-hmm.
have a part where the character goes to the doctor. Her weight went up, but her body size went down.
Mm-hmm.
Like her clothes are drooping on her.
Yep.
And the doctor's like, well, she's like, but look at me.
Right.
Do I look like that number on the screen?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a thing that a lot of women go through, regardless of if they're fat, is just not being seen as people by the doctors.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, and like you said, it's the entire society. It's worse in the doctor thing because the doctor's entire purpose is supposed to help you be whatever healthy level you want to be. So if given they, with all their training, can't get through society's issues, then that's a very poor sign. But like you
yeah.
said, I have the same sort of challenges in my own family, and
Mm-hmm.
the way people will make comments if you pick up something in a supermarket, or they'll just look at you sideways or something, like, oh well, you clearly shouldn't be touching that kind of food item. And it's just, I
Yeah.
mean, it's just nonstop happening, and it wears you down.
It does. It does. When you go to a coffee shop and they're like, all right, if I order the super skinny latte, blah, 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 they're thinking, well, that's what you need, fatso. Or if you want to order, the mochaccino, it's like, really? Do you need to be eating? No matter what you choose,
Mm-hmm.
you're being judged.
Yep. Yep. So.
And again, it's similar to what you were saying, going grocery shopping. You put a whole bunch of healthy stuff on the conveyor belt, and they're like, yep, yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
You put a bunch of unhealthy stuff on there. I'm like, well, obviously, that's why you're the size you are.
Yep.
And it's a really terrible thing for people to judge like that, to that shaming culture that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they use, well, I'm just trying to help,
Mm-hmm.
like, makes it even worse, because I have another character in the story who's like, well, I just want you to be your best you, and they're really a condescending bitch.
Mm-hmm.
who are making themselves feel better under the guise of giving helpful advice.
Right, right.
So.
Well, I think it's good that you are writing these things, and hopefully we can get them out into the hands of more people, because I think it's really good for people of that shape to know they're not alone. Well, I mean, I think most of them realize they're not alone, but for some of my friends, they feel very alone. So it helps them really know that there's other people feeling the same things like that. And then also, I think it's really important for other people to think more about the way that they're treating other people.
Yeah.
So they might think, like you said, that they're being helpful or supportive or whatever, and they don't realize that it's still this dripping of water torture, because they're not the only person doing this in the person's life. Every single person the person interacts with, the heavier person, I mean, is doing that same sort of thing to them, and there's no break from it anywhere.
Right. Yeah, and that's very much it, and that's what I was hoping to like shine a light on with this is, you know, even if you're not intending to be mean, and I have other characters who aren't intending, who are, you know, have good, honest, good intentions, they're still suspect. Like, and when you have that kind of, that level of that through your life, you really have a hard time trusting anyone, even if they are actually trying to be helpful, because there's so much that you've gone through.
Yep. Do you think that you'll write more pieces in that type of topic area?
Probably. I know I have a lot of poetry in that area. Two of the poems that I have, actually, I do have some poetry in the Horror Writers Association showcase. Last year and the year before, both of them are based on female body image in our culture and the stuff that you're kind of forced to go through on not even just like a social level, but even just a medicine level. When you try and get help for a medical thing, and they're like, well, like, but that whole, look, you just lost weight. Like, no. That's a symptom, not a cause in this case.
Right.
At one point, my character thinking, if I had cancer, would they just tell me to lose weight? And like, people like, nope, happened. Like, like literally happened. It was cancer. The doctor said lose weight. So yeah.
Well, hopefully we can fix society. But I guess we'll see if we have enough time to do that before we either boil to death or.
Yeah.
I have some hope.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'd be writing if I didn't have hope that it makes a difference.
Oh no, definitely. Your works make a difference. I was just thinking more in the overall scheme of society evolving to a better place. That I don't know if we have the centuries that we need to be able to make that progress before we all die a fiery death.
Yeah, that's a very fair concern as far as I say. Yeah.
Because I don't think it's something that we could fix in like 5 years or 10 years. I think it's going to be a long process to be able to get people to really embrace other people that look differently from them. I mean, we have enough problems with relatively minor things.
Yes. Yeah, very much on all of that. Yeah. And that's why we still have horror. And horror as a genre is growing currently. Shocked. Are you shocked about this? I'm so shocked about this.
What other words would you like to say to horror writers and readers?
Keep reading and keep writing. Work on. Don't think it's a waste to just work on craft. One of the things that I like to tell other writers is it's okay to write practice stuff that you're never going to share with anyone. I mean, if you look at people who do anything artistically or physically, you do practice. Professional sports people they practice. Not every basket that someone shoots is for a game. when you look at artists, artists have pages and pages and pages of sketches that they're not going to share with anyone. It's practice. And one of the things that I see a lot of authors doing, especially now, is rushing to try and get published when they haven't put in the practice time. And when you put in practice time, you can write about all sorts of stuff. I'm actually a big proponent of people playing with fan fiction because that's a great way to get practice in. And depending on the community that you write for, you get feedback. Like, this works as a story element, this doesn't. Some of the stronger writers that I've got to work with have spent a fair amount of time writing fan fiction just to practice before they had an idea of their own that they wanted to explore. Or even if it is just your own ideas that you want to explore, play with them. And if you don't want to share them, that's totally okay. If you want to use them as a practice piece and ask what other people think, you might never get that piece to something that's ready to be published. And that is totally okay. Keep writing more stuff, because I've got a whole files and files of pieces that I've written, and I've probably written those pieces to the best that they could be, but they're not publishable. They're not a finished piece. And the fact that I wrote them, though, goes into my writing for the future. So they needed to be written. They needed me to work the crap out of them. They don't need to be out in the world and published.
Okay.
So be patient with yourself as writers. Take time to really learn the craft, to practice things, to do things that you don't think you'll like. Like, I never thought I would do extreme horror, but I really enjoyed it. My work in progress currently is actually a contemporary paranormal romance fantasy cross thing. Totally not a thing that I thought that I'd ever write. But it's bringing me a lot of joy to work on it, as slow as I'm going. And I think that will be something that I can publish once I get through all the crap right now and clean it up. But I need to also write a whole bunch of stuff that's going to get cut out of it because I need to write that. So yeah, write stuff that you don't need to share, write stuff that you don't need to publish, and be okay with practicing, be okay with having stories that you don't need to get published.
Okay.
That's probably the best thing that I can tell more writers to do.
Oh, great. All right. Well, I will put links to all your compilations so that people can easily find them. Thank you very much for coming and speaking with me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Also, feel free to post links to the New England Horror Writers themselves.
Yes.
It's a really good organization. And a lot of we help each other out in a lot of ways.
Okay, great. I'll definitely do that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you again for having me. It was really great chatting with you.
All right, great. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.